Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, Jamille Fields Allsbrook, who is the Director of Women's Health and Rights with the Women's Initiative at the Center for American Progress. Previously, she was a Senior Policy Analyst at Planned Parenthood Federation of America, where she worked to improve reproductive health care access for low-income people, women, and young people, with focus on health care reform, including the Affordable Care Act's implementation and defense. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jamille Fields Allsbrook.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Well, thanks for joining us. And it does seem that we know that Donald Trump is obsessed with undoing anything with Obama's name on it. And the Affordable Care Act has been his target obsessively for the longest time. But why do you think the Supreme Court helped him out today with this decision to basically, I don't know whether they're stripping away the birth control mandate under the ACA, but they're going a long way to nullifying it, aren't they?
Yeah, thank you. This has been a concerted effort by the Trump administration on two fronts. As you said, the ACA requires birth control coverage for women with no out-of-pocket costs from most employer and university plans. And the administration has long sought to chip away the Affordable Care Act piecemeal by piecemeal. And this is just the latest example of that. And also has sought, and unfortunately the Supreme Court has granted them the ability to allow employers and bosses and universities to decide for women what healthcare service remains for them. So, your question, it does not eliminate the ACA's birth control benefit. That remains intact, but it significantly undermines it for potentially thousands of women.
Well, doesn't that mean that employers can basically claim religious or moral objections? That's pretty subjective, isn't it? So if they want to save some money.
That's exactly what the decision will mean. It will mean that virtually any employer, any university can claim a religious or moral exemption and can say, I object to providing birth control coverage. To be clear, there was already exemptions afforded for religious entities and others for religious organizations. This will allow a large swath of organizations who might have no religious or moral or faith-based affiliation to just essentially decide for women, we don't want to cover birth control. And it could just be a guise to discriminate or to, as you said, to not include it in the plan and save money.
Well, the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, provides birth control benefits to nearly 62 million American women, and with no out-of-pocket costs. And this has saved American women, mostly young women and minorities, $1.4 billion a year. So that is a lot of money. And surely the people who need birth control the most, young, who are sexually active, and other women who are sexually active, they're going to feel the pinch, aren't they, out of their pocketbook? It's not inexpensive, is it, birth control?
No, it's not. And, two things. One, out-of-pocket costs for women can range to hundreds to thousands of dollars. In particular, the birth control pills can cost $600 a year out of pocket. IUD, which is the most long-acting form of birth control, can cost somewhere around $1,100. So it's a significant amount of money out of pocket for women. And even if a woman has health insurance coverage and might only have to pay a copay, even a small amount of money can be a barrier to care for women, particularly low-income women. So there's been some studies to show that even something that's $10 a month can discourage women in particular from accessing certain preventive services. So yes, this is both first and foremost, this is a health issue, and it's also a financial issue for women, given birth control has been associated with allowing women to plan and space their pregnancies, as well as allow them to pursue their career and educational pursuits as a result of contraception.
And again, I'm speaking with Jamille Fields Allsbrook, who is the Director of Women's Health and Rights with the Women's Initiative at the Center for American Progress. Previously, she was a senior policy analyst at Planned Parenthood Federation of America, where she worked to improve reproductive health care access for low-income people, women, and young people, and focused on health care reform, including the Affordable Care Act's implementation and defense. And we're talking about the Supreme Court decision today to a large extent striking down the access to contraception available under the Affordable Care Act, which is going to cost women a lot of money and gives the employers the ability to opt out of coverage by saying that they have moral or religious objections to birth control itself. So I don't understand what the morality or the religious ideology or philosophy behind this is, because if you take away birth control, abortion then becomes more likely. And we know that the majority that voted today, 7-2, the Supreme Court is dominated by Catholics, very conservative ones at that. So who were the liberals that voted along with the predictable conservatives?
Sure. So, if we'll of course always like to think that the justices don't fall into the liberal or conservative bucket, but to answer your question, Justices Breyer and Justice Kagan both wrote a concurrence and didn't join the majority, but wrote a concurrence that effectively allowed this decision to move forward to undermine birth control access under the ACA benefit. And it is important, though, to recognize that the reasoning they outlined in that decision, is slightly different than the majority. They don't make the claim that birth control is not a benefit for women, or that there is not a substantial government interest in passing and having such a requirement in law to require coverage of birth control. Instead, they do so on some procedural grounds and actually kick it back to the lower courts. And so, we are hopeful that, and know that the fight will continue, and hope that the lower courts will recognize that now the ball can be in their court to strike down and not allow these problematic rules to go forward.
But I don't want to put you on the spot, Jamille, and ask you philosophical and religious questions, but I'm still puzzled because this case was brought by an obscure group of, I think, elderly nuns called the Little Sisters of the Poor. And I just don't understand the moral position here, why you would strike down or prevent young women and women in general from having birth control, because that makes abortion more likely.
Yeah.
And so is there an explanation? Did the Little Sisters of the Poor explain why they oppose birth control? We know they oppose abortion, but why do they oppose birth control?
I won't speak on their behalf, but what I will say is that they make an argument that, the Little Sisters of the Poor, to be clear, already would not have had to cover birth control under their plan. And so that makes it even more puzzling of why they brought the case in the first place. Their claim is that they even objected to filling out a form to saying, I object to providing birth control, and allowing the women to be able to go get birth control on their own. And it is just because they object to birth control as a matter is what their claim is. From our perspective, I take your point about, without access to birth control could lead to more abortions. And from our perspective, we think that abortion and birth control are all health care, and that it's important for women to be able to have a full range of reproductive health services, to be able to plan and control their own lives. And that, of course, is in stark contrast, obviously, to the Little Sisters of the Poor and what seems to be their position, though I won't speak on their behalf.
So just in the last couple of minutes then, Jamille Fields Allsbrook, you mentioned that there is some remedy here What would that be again? What the Congress, of course, the House is in Democratic hands and the Senate is in Republican hands. So one wonders what kind of progress could be made to redress this situation for 62 million American women who depend upon birth control under the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, that's a great question. So two things. One, as I mentioned, I don't think we're unfortunately done with the litigation. The Pennsylvania Attorney General has already pledged to continue the fight, and because there could, in order to protect women's access to birth control in the courts. But there's also, to the second part of your question, a more straightforward answer, which is that Congress could act. In fact, Congress could just simply rescind these rules, and we urge Congress to do so. Today's decision makes it even more imperative that they rescind the Trump birth control rules, so that women can continue to access birth control, and we hope that they will take up that mantle and do so, recognizing that we can't rely upon the courts alone, especially when we know that this administration has stacked the courts, both for the Supreme Court as well as federal courts, with with more conservative justices than ever. And so we can't just rely upon the courts, though we appreciate the continue to fight there. Congress must act and rescind these birth control rules, as well as ensure that women have a full range of access to reproductive health services, no matter their employer, university, insurer, or otherwise.
Well, just in closing, 62 million American women should vote, shouldn't they? 99% of women aged between 15 and 44 who are sexually active rely on contraception. That's a pretty big constituency. Do you think that this is going to be an impetus for more women to vote against conservative judges and their Republican supporters?
Well, we certainly hope that women will go out and vote in their best interests, and that we know that not everyone pays attention to the Supreme Court. Not everyone pays attention to these arcane rules like we do on a daily basis. But we do hope that people will see and see that, as ridiculous as it is that it's 2020 and we're still fighting over women access to birth control, and to hold their government leaders, no matter what their political ideology, responsible if they do not protect and adhere to advancing women's health and financial security. So certainly hope women will pay attention, and certainly hope that all people, make it out and vote what's in their best interest.
Well, thank you for joining us here today, Jamille Fields Allsbrook.
Thank you very much for having me.
And again, I'll be speaking with Jamille Fields Allsbrook, who is the Director of the Women's Health and Rights with the Women's Initiative at the Center for American Progress. Previously, she was a Senior Policy Analyst at Planned Parenthood Federation of America, where she worked to improve reproductive health care access for low-income people, women, and young people, and focused on health care reform, including the Affordable Care Act's implementation and defense. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back assessing the visit today to the White House of Mexico's leader, AMLO, who showed up at a photo op which Canada's Prime Minister Trudeau decided not to attend.